Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. I bear witness that no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah Ta'ala, the one who has no partner and no similar, the one who has no length and no width and no depth and no perimeter, the one who's not a volume and is not in a place. And how could he be in a place when he existed before time and space? He created everything except himself, including you and your actions. Nothing occurs except by his will, both good and bad, he destined to happen. He speaks without sound, letter, or language, not Arabic, Hebrew, nor Korean. He's not light, he's not a spirit, he has nothing in common with human beings. He's not in the direction of up, down, right, left, front, nor back. And whatever you imagine in your mind, Allah is different than that. And I bear witness that our noble, unrivaled Master Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the slave of Allah, his final messenger, and the best of all of God's creations. May Allah unite us with him in paradise and grant us a drink from his basin. And may Allah increase us in patience, humility, knowledge, and comprehension, and help us to put our knowledge into practice and grant us all sincere intentions. Ameen. We're continuing in the book, the Hadrami introduction, Al-Muqaddimah Al-Hadramiyya, which was written by the Allama Bafadl. It is a introductory text in Shafi'i fiqh. We've arrived in the book on page 22. Page 22, in which the author, may Allah have mercy on him, will explain to us how we know the prayer times. Okay, and before we get into these prayer times, I just want to repeat something that I've said. You know, I say it frequently in person. I've said it in the 7 Hadith course, and I want to repeat it here. That our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us how to know when the salat times come in and when the salat times go out. He told us what signs indicate these transitions. And he warned us against calculating these things. So I just want to encourage everyone, and I know I'm speaking in a gentle way, but please understand that I mean this in the strongest possible way. Okay? Do not rely on the apps on your phone and the calculations that you find on the internet and these prayer calendars and the like. Okay, our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Inna ummatun ummiya la naktubu wa la nahsub." He says, we are an illiterate nation. We don't write and we don't calculate. Okay, what he means by that is not that it's forbidden to calculate, but rather that the proper way to do the things that every Muslim has to do, those things, when done properly, they do not require calculation. Okay, our Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he's not saying it's haram for you to study math in school. He's not saying it's haram to be an engineer. Like, it's not haram to do calculations. Okay, but the matters in our religion that every Muslim needs to know, such as the salat times every day, which is a responsibility of each Muslim to know the times and to pray, or like the knowledge of the months, because it's a responsibility of every Muslim to know when Ramadan arrives so that they can fast it. The things that every Muslim must do, these things do not require a knowledge of writing, nor do they require a knowledge of arithmetic. So we know, therefore, that anyone who calculates the coming of Ramadan or calculates when the Eid is going to be or calculates the salat times, these people are not following the method that our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us to follow. In another hadith, our Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, "Inna khiyara ibadillahi الذين يراعون الشمس والقمر والأظلة والنجوم لذكر الله. He said, truly, the choicest of the slaves of Allah are those who observe the sun and the moon and the shadows and the stars for the remembrance of Allah, meaning for the salat. Okay, so we want to be included in that group, those who actually do it the way our Prophet ﷺ told us to do it, by observing the sun and the stars and the shadows, etc. Now, having said all of that, let's go to page 22, where it says prayer times. Page 22, prayer times. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, said, the beginning of the time of al-Dhuhr is when the sun begins to descend from its zenith. Okay, so the author here, he begins with the time of Dhuhr. It's a tradition in the Shafi'i school when teaching the Salat times to always begin with Dhuhr. And that's because Salat al-Dhuhr was the first Salat that our Prophet ﷺ prayed after the obligation to pray 5 times a day was put upon him. So this obligation was put upon him on the night of the Isra and the Mi'raj. And the next morning, they did not pray Subh right away. The first Salat that they prayed was al-Dhuhr. And then they prayed Asr and Maghrib and Isha and then Subh. So that's the order that the scholars of the Shafi'i school present the Salats in, because that's the historical order in which they were performed by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, in order to understand what we're saying here, I need you to understand something. First off, let me make a very small circle here. Let's fill it. I just want to make the center of the circle a bit easier to see. Okay. So first thing I want to do is I want to make sure everyone understands the motion of the sun. I'm sure most of you know that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. How many of you know that in between the east and the west, as the sun moves from the east to the west, if you're in the northern hemisphere, the sun passes towards the south. So what that means is the sun rises in the east and it passes to the south, and then it sets in the west like that. Okay, some people might think that the sun just kind of goes across like that, east to west, but no, it actually goes to the south and then it sets in the west like that. Okay, furthermore, the height of the sun varies throughout the day. So when the sun is first rising, it's very low, it's close to the ground. In fact, when it begins rising, only part of the sun is visible because part of it is blocked by the earth. Okay, so when the sun is first rising in the east, the sun will be very low to the ground, which means, therefore, that if there's a stick, imagine this black dot is a stick that's sticking straight up, right? Like pointing at your eye because you're looking down on it from above and the stick is standing up straight. So when the sun is rising in the east, because the sun is very low to the ground, the shadow of that stick is going to be pointing to the west, which is away from the sun, but the shadow will also be very long because the sun is low in the sky. The low is the sun is down near the earth. So the shadows of everything are going to be long shadows, and they're going to be pointing away from the sun. But then as the sun rises and gets higher in the sky, it starts moving towards the south. So when the sun gets to here, this will now be pointing away from the sun like this, but it's also going to get shorter. Okay, the direction the shadow is pointing is going to change, but the shadow will also get shorter because the sun is getting higher. As the sun gets higher still, the shadow will move. Once the sun is there, the shadow is going to be over here, and it's going to be shorter. Okay, and when the sun gets dead, exact, perfect south, okay, when the sun gets right there, the shadow is going to be pointing dead, exact, perfect north, and the shadow is going to be the shortest that it's ever going to be on that day. Let me just clean this up a little bit. There we go. Okay, so the sun rises in the east. The sun rises in the east, moves to the south, and in the south is when the sun will be at its highest point. It's at that moment when it's dead center south. That's when the sun will be at its highest point, and that point is called the zenith. The zenith. It's when the sun is at its peak for that day. But after it goes past its peak, the sun will continue going this way, and the shadow will continue to point the opposite of where the sun is, and it's going to start to get longer again. Then the sun's going to move this way, and the shadow will get longer and continue to point away from the sun, and eventually the sun's going to get to the west, and it's going to set. It's going to be down near the ground again, and the stick that's here, its shadow will be very long by that point because the sun is getting lower and lower. Okay, I just want to make sure we all understand that fact of how the sun moves. It rises in the east and it's low. It's going to keep rising until it reaches the highest point it's going to reach, its zenith. And by the time it reaches its zenith, the sun will be dead south, which means the shadows will be pointing north. And the sun will continue after that, going to the west, getting lower and lower and lower until by the time it gets to the west, it will set, it'll sink below the level of the earth so that the earth itself will block you from seeing it. Okay, if we, inshallah, understand the movement of the sun, we'll be able to understand what this says about the Dhuhr Salat time. It says the beginning of the time of Dhuhr is when the sun begins to descend. That means go down from its zenith. So what that means is the sun's going to be in the east. The shadow is going to be long and pointing west. The sun's going to slowly go up. The shadow is going to slowly shrink and turn with the sun. The sun's going to go here, getting higher. The shadow is going to turn with the sun and get shorter. When the sun is perfectly south, that's when the sun is at its zenith. That's when the sun will be at the highest point it's going to be on that day. And that's when the shadow is going to be the shortest it's going to get on that day. Okay. Excuse me, just one. Assalamu alaikum. So when the sun is at its zenith, it will be dead south. And the shadows of any stick sticking up will be pointing dead north. And the length of the shadow will be the shortest that it's going to be on that day. So what that means is there are a number of ways that we can tell when Dhuhr time comes in. One way is if you know exactly the direction of south, exactly, then you can face south. And the sun, when it's at its zenith, it'll be right between your eyes. If you're facing south, the sun will be between your eyes. So the moment you notice that the sun moved a little bit to the right, so it's not dead center between your eyes anymore, then you know the sun has begun its descent. You know Dhuhr time began. So that's one way to know that Dhuhr has begun, because you notice that the sun has gone past dead south. All morning, it was on the left side of dead south. And once you see that now it's on the right side of dead south, you know that Dhuhr time has come in. Another way that you can do that is basically the same thing, except instead of looking at the sun, you look at the shadows. Because if there's a, here we go. Because if there's a dotted line, let me make this thing, okay. Pretend there's a dotted line pointing exactly north from your stick that's sticking out of the ground. What that means is when the sun is in the east, the shadow of this the shadow of your stick will be pointing to the west. And as the sun is going up, the shadow is going to turn like this, getting shorter. And when the sun is dead center, is dead south, the shadow of the object will be pointing dead north. Okay? And it'll be the shortest it's going to be that day. So the first way you can tell that Dhuhr came in is by facing south and seeing that the sun, which a moment ago was dead center between your eyes, shifted a little bit to the right. Another way you can tell that Dhuhr came in is by looking at the shadows. A moment, a few minutes before Dhuhr, the shadow will be to the left. A shadow will be to the left of this dotted line, which is facing perfectly north. And when the sun is at its zenith, the shadow will be exactly on top of that dotted line. And so the moment you notice that the shadow moved even the slightest little bit to the right side of that line, then you know Dhuhr is in, because you know the sun has begun descending. You know the sun went past the zenith, which means it's going down now. So how many ways do we know of knowing that Dhuhr came in? Way number one is to face south and see that the sun is not between your eyes, but is a little bit to the right of being between your eyes. You know Dhuhr is in. Another way is to look at the shadows. And if you know, if you're able to tell when the shadow is pointing exactly due north, then as soon as the shadow passes that due north line, you know Dhuhr is in. There's a third way to tell that Dhuhr is in, and that is by the length of the shadows. Okay, so the shadows in the morning are longer. They shrink, shrink, shrink all morning long as the sun approaches the zenith. Once it hits its zenith, that's the shortest the shadow will be in that day. So if you notice that the shadows have started to get longer, then you know the sun passed its zenith. Because all morning the shadows are getting shorter, 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 shorter. Once they start getting longer, Dhuhr is in. So the way that you know that Dhuhr is in is by noticing any of these three changes. Okay, that the shadow of a thing started to grow, whereas all morning it had been shrinking. If the shadow started to grow, Dhuhr is in. If the shadow went past that line that's pointing due north, Dhuhr is in. Or if the sun went past due south, Dhuhr is in. These are the three signs 3 ways of knowing that the sun has begun its descent from its zenith. Any questions about that first sentence here? How do we know the beginning of a dhuhr time? I just gave you 3 ways. I'll say them one more time. Way number 1, the sun, if you face due south, the sun went past the midpoint of your eyes. Way number 2, the shadow of a stick sticking straight up, its shadow went past the line that's pointing due north. And the third way is that the shadow of something sticking up, which had been shrinking all morning long, has begun to grow. Any of those 3 signs is a conclusive indication that dhuhr time is in. Next sentence. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, said, its time ends. Okay, so in the beginning, we're talking about how dhuhr comes in. Now we're going to switch topics and see, how do you know when dhuhr time ends? It says its time ends when the shadow of everything is the same length as the object, minus the shadow at the time of zenith. What does that mean? For that, I want you to start looking at this section over here. Okay, here I have basically the same thing as what you see on the left, except this time, instead of looking down on it from above, we're looking at it from the side. All right, this fat line here, you can think of that as the ground. This black line sticking straight up, that's the stick that's sticking up. And this blue part is the shadow that it casts. So let's imagine, in this example here, that the stick that's sticking up is 5 feet tall. You have a stick sticking straight up that's 5 feet tall. And let's imagine that when the sun was at its zenith, this 5 foot tall stick had a shadow that was 1 foot long. A stick that's 5 feet high, 5 feet tall. When the sun was at its zenith, the shadow of that stick was 1 foot long. Okay? That's the situation we're talking about here. He says its time ends when the shadow of everything is the same length as the object, minus the shadow at the time of the zenith. What he means is, if this 5 foot tall stick had a 1 foot shadow when the sun was at its zenith, well then as it starts to go down, the shadow is going to get longer. He's saying once that shadow becomes 6 feet long, dhuhr time has ended. Once it becomes 6 feet long. Where did I get that number 6 from? Where did I get the number 6 from? I got the number 6 because the stick itself is 5 feet tall. And at zenith, it had a 1 foot shadow. So dhuhr time will be over when that 1 foot shadow grows by a length equal to the height of the object. So it had 1 foot at zenith. It needs to add 5 feet to its length. 5 feet because the stick is 5 feet tall. So whatever the shadow was at the moment of zenith, when the sun was at its peak, that shadow needs to grow by the length of the object. Let's do another example. Let's imagine in this case, our stick is 5 feet tall, and the shadow it gave at zenith was only a half a foot. Okay? If the shadow was a half a foot at zenith, then as the sun is starting to come down, when Asr time comes, we'll know that dhuhr has ended when the length of this shadow becomes what? It has the half a foot that it had at zenith, and it needs to add to that the 5 feet, which is the height of the object. So once this thing becomes 5.5 feet long, that's when dhuhr time has ended. That's when what? When dhuhr time has ended. Let's do another example. Let's say that this stick, instead of being 5 feet tall, it's 13 feet tall. And let's say that when the sun was at its zenith, this 13-foot stick cast a shadow that was 3 feet long. When the sun was at its zenith, meaning the shadows are short, that's the shortest the shadow will be on that day, the shadow at zenith was just 3 feet. The shadow, when the sun was at its zenith, was 3 feet. My question to you, and I want you to type it in the box, how long must the shadow be before Dhuhr time ends? Okay, at what length does the shadow indicate the end of Dhuhr time? Dhuhr time ends when the shadow reaches how long? That's the question. Right in the box. In this example, a stick is 13 feet tall. When the sun was at the zenith, it had a 3-foot shadow. When will Dhuhr time end? When the shadow reaches what? When the shadow reaches how long? Okay, now I'm getting some answers. I'm starting to see some answers now. Okay, good, good, good. Yes, those of you who are putting answers in the box are getting it correct. In this example, when the shadow reaches 16 feet long, Dhuhr time has ended. Where in the world did I get 16 feet from? Because the shadow was 3 feet long at zenith, and the stick itself is 13 feet tall, so we have to add those numbers together. When the shadow is 16 feet, Dhuhr time is over. Barakallahu fikum. It seems that you understood. The author then mentioned something, and I have to warn you that the translation is missing something here. But then the author said, it says in my book, a preference time. I would like you to scratch out the word preference and write the word virtuous. So now that we know that Dhuhr, we know how to tell when Dhuhr begins and when Dhuhr ends, you should know that within Dhuhr time, there are different times as well. Okay? So he's mentioning that within Dhuhr time, there's a time within Dhuhr time, which is the very virtuous time to perform the salat. He says it has a virtuous time, which is its beginning. Okay, so within the range of Dhuhr time, okay, there might be several hours between when Dhuhr comes in and when Dhuhr time ends. Within that space of several hours that you have, the best time for you to make salat is the virtuous time. And the virtuous time is the very beginning of the salat time. Okay, if you want to get the reward of praying in the virtuous time, what it means is, as soon as you confirmed that the time was in, you busied yourself with things pertaining to the salat from that moment. Okay, so if you needed to go make wudu, then you went and you made wudu and then you prayed. Or if you needed to put clothes on as well, then you went and you made wudu and you put your clothes on. If you needed to figure out which direction to face, you did that. If you needed to wait a few minutes for other people to come so you can pray in a group, you did that. If you needed to walk to the masjid, you did that. Okay, but everything you did from the moment you knew that the time was in, everything you did from that moment was something pertaining to the salat. You busied yourself with the matters of the salat from the time that the time began, from the time that the salat time came in. If you do that, then you are said to have prayed during the virtuous time. Okay. So if you understand that, you know that the virtuous time varies from person to person. Okay, someone who needs to make tayammum or someone who has incontinence, there's more things that they need to do once the time comes in. So they may end up praying their salat later than someone else. But it doesn't mean that the one who prayed later somehow wasted time or delayed. No, they just had more things to do before they could perform the salat. They still prayed in the virtuous time as long as everything they did from the time the salat came in was something pertaining to the salat. If you do that, then you have attained the virtue of praying in the virtuous time. Then there's another sentence which is not in my translation. It's not written here. I want you to add it to the end of the paragraph. It should say, then a choice time until its end. So the final sentence of the paragraph should say, it has a virtuous time, which is its beginning, then a choice time until its end. It has a virtuous time, which is its beginning, then a choice time until its end. It has a virtuous time, which is its beginning, then a choice time until its end. What he means by this is that the best time to pray Dhuhr is the virtuous time, meaning as soon as you knew the time was in, you started your salat, or at least starting the things that you need to do in order to make the salat. Once you miss the virtuous time, meaning if you failed to immediately busy yourself with the affairs of salat, then that means whenever you pray, you're going to be in the choice time. And the choice time extends all the way until the haram time. Okay, now he doesn't mention the haram time here in this paragraph because he mentioned it in the last portion of the chapter, the portion we finished up last week. He mentioned that we mentioned that the obligation of salat is a wide obligation, right? That you don't have to pray as soon as the time comes in. You can delay it within its time, right? As long as the time doesn't go out, you can delay. And this is permissible for you. But we said it has a limit, right? We said you can only delay up until that moment where if you start your salat at that moment, you'll be able to finish the salat within the salat time. Whereas if you delayed just one moment later, then you would not be able to finish the salat within its time. Okay? Once we said it's haram for you to delay past that moment. Okay, once you reach a point where you cannot complete the salat within its time, even if you hurried to do so, even if you rushed in your salat, even if you eliminated all the parts of the salat that aren't required, you would not be able to finish the salat within the time. If you've delayed to the point where you cannot complete the salat in its time, that is haram. Okay, you're sinful for delaying the salat too much. That last few minutes of the salat time, that haram time, that's what we call the haram time. And so the choice time, which is what the author is talking about here, the choice time is everything after the virtuous time until the haram time. That's what he's saying here. So he's saying within Dhuhr time, you have a virtuous time if you busied yourself with salat immediately. And if you fail to busy yourself with salat immediately, then the entire rest of the Dhuhr time is your choice time, which means it's a very good time to make the salat, very rewardable time. The choice time is a very rewardable time to make the salat. It's just not as rewardable as the virtuous time. But the choice time is a good time to pray. And the choice time lasts all the way up until that moment where it would be haram to delay any further. Any questions about the first paragraph which deals with Dhuhr time? This is the hardest one to understand. Okay, a lot of us nowadays, we don't pay a whole lot of attention to the sun. So we don't always notice the path it takes across the sky. We don't always notice the shadows getting longer and shorter. Okay, but if you've understood this, then you'll know how to tell when Dhuhr comes in, and you'll know how to tell when Dhuhr time ends. And if you know that, then the rest is easy. Let's go to the Asr paragraph. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, says, the beginning of the time for Al-Asr is when the time of Dhuhr departs. And again, he's missing something here. You should add and increases. After the word departs, you need to add the words and increases. And then we continue with what's in the book. It says by a small amount. Okay. So I'll read the way the first sentence should read. It should say the beginning of the time for Al-Asr is when the time of Dhuhr departs and increases by a small amount. What he means by that is Dhuhr time ends once the shadow of an object equals its height plus whatever the shadow was at zenith. That moment, when the shadow reaches that length, that moment is like the end of Dhuhr time. Some scholars, including Bafadl, the author of this book, they say that you do not know that Asr has come in until the point that you've noticed that the shadow grew the tiniest bit more than that. You need to observe that the shadow is actually beyond, like if we go back to this example that's showing on the screen, we know 16 feet is the mark that Dhuhr has ended. They say you need to observe that the shadow went the tiniest bit past 16 feet for you to confirm that Asr has started. Okay, so by this opinion, Asr doesn't begin until you've noticed that Dhuhr has ended. Like the shadow reached a measurement that indicates the end of Dhuhr and then went the tiniest bit further. That way you know Dhuhr is completely out and Asr is definitely in. But some of the scholars don't go into that much detail. They simply say the moment Dhuhr ends is the moment Asr begins. So you don't need to notice any extra lengthening. Some scholars say you don't need to notice any extra lengthening of the shadow. And in the end, this difference is very, very minor because the shadows are lengthening basically every moment. So if you notice that the shadow was exactly the length it needed to be for Dhuhr to end, and then once you notice that, you went to whichever place you're going to pray at, say you had to take 2 steps to the left and then face a certain direction and start the prayer. In the time it takes you to take 2 steps to the left and turn and begin the prayer, by then the shadow would have already lengthened a little bit. Okay, so in practical terms, there's no real difference between these two opinions in practical terms. But yes, the author, may Allah have mercy on him, he was being very precise when he was saying that the end of Dhuhr, the shadow reaching the height, the length of the shadow being equal to the height of the stick plus the length of the shadow at zenith, that indicates the end of Dhuhr, and that in and of itself does not indicate the start of Asr. But there needs to be some observed increase beyond that. That's the start of Asr time. He says it has 4 subdivisions. So unlike Dhuhr, which only had a few times. It had a virtuous time, a choice time, and then a haram time for a total of 3. Asr has 4 divisions. And again, he's not going to mention the haram time. So it means there's actually 5 times in Asr. He says it has 4 subdivisions. Number 1, the virtuous time, which is the beginning of it. So Asr has a virtuous time, just like Dhuhr has a virtuous time. Okay, and it works the same way. Once you've confirmed that Asr time is in, if you busy yourself with the affairs of Salat from that moment, then that means you've prayed in the virtuous time. Keeping in mind that waiting for the congregational prayer to start means you're busying yourself with the affairs of Salat. So whenever you pray in Jama'ah in the masjid, that is always the virtuous time. He says the choice or the time of choice, which is up to when the shadow becomes twice the length of the object. Okay, so the second time, after the virtuous time, the next segment of the Asr Salat time is the choice time. The choice time is everything after the virtuous time up until this stick. So I'm going to go back to this example here, although I'm going to make the numbers smaller. Let's say our stick was just 3 feet. And let's say that at zenith, the shadow was 1 foot. Okay. In this example, Dhuhr time would end once the shadow reached 4 feet. Right? That would be the end of Dhuhr time. And the choice time of Asr would end once the shadow became 7 feet long. Where did the 7 feet come from? It's double the height of the stick plus whatever the shadow was at zenith. Okay, so if the shadow at zenith in this example was 1 foot long and the stick is 3 feet high, when that 1 foot shadow grows by the height of the stick, when it grows by 3 feet and therefore becomes 4 feet long, that's the end of Dhuhr time. When it grows by another 3 feet, that's when the choice time of Asr has ended. And I noticed that someone asked about this twice the length of the object stuff. You should know that in the Hanafi school, actually I shouldn't even say that, according to Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, Asr time doesn't begin until the length of a shadow is double the height of the stick plus the shadow at zenith. So the time when the Shafi'is would be saying the choice time of Asr has ended, those who follow Abu Hanifa would be saying Asr is only just at that point beginning. So to those who follow Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, Dhuhr time is much longer than it is in the other madhabs, and Asr begins much later than it does in the other madhabs. This is why some of you who use those apps on your phone, if you go into the settings, you'll notice one of the choices they give you in the settings is, do you want to follow the Hanafi rules or the other 3 madhabs? What they mean by that is, if you choose to follow Abu Hanifa, then they will calculate Asr to begin much later, because to the Hanafis, Asr doesn't start until the shadow of an object is double the height of the object plus whatever the shadow was at zenith. But for the Shafi'i school, no. Asr begins when the shadow is equal to the height of the stick plus whatever the shadow was at zenith. That's the beginning of Asr. And when it reaches double the height of the object plus whatever the shadow was at zenith, when it reaches that length, that is when the choice time of Asr has ended. Okay, you want to make every effort. You want to do what? You want to make every effort to pray your salats in the virtuous time or the choice time, because those are the times when the reward is high. The choice time carries a very high reward, and the virtuous time has a reward even better than the choice time. Okay, so you want to pray your salats in the virtuous time or the choice time. Okay, But there are more times within Asr. After the choice time, what comes next? It says, then the permissibility time. So after the choice time, the next segment within Asr time is the permissible time. And what they mean by permissible time is permissible without any dislikedness. This would be the portion of Asr after the choice time ends and up until the sky starts to turn yellow. Okay, the last 30 minutes before sunset is a time when the western sky is going to be very yellow. And the sun, which is kind of whitish during the day, the sun itself turns very yellow, and the sky around it turns very yellow for like the last 30 minutes or so of Asr time, the last 30 minutes before sunset. So the permissible time is from the end of the choice time up until that yellowness begins. Up until there's about 30 minutes left in Asr time. That was period number 3. So we said there's a virtuous time, followed by a choice time, followed by the permissible time that doesn't have any dislikedness. That time extends until the sky turns yellow. It says up to when the sun starts to become yellow. Okay, that's when the permissible time ends. He says then, now he's going to mention the 4th time, then the disliked time until the end of it. He's saying the 4th time in Asr is the disliked time, the time when salat is permissible, but it's disliked. Okay, when we say it's disliked, it means you don't get reward for that salat. If you have, without any excuse, delayed your Asr until the sun turns yellow and you're praying in the disliked time, well, alhamdulillah, at least you didn't delay until the haram time. But you do not expect any reward for a salat that you prayed in the disliked time. Okay, a general rule that we should always keep in mind is that the slave does not draw spiritually near to Allah by doing things that are makruh. Things that are disliked does not bring the slave closer to Allah spiritually. Okay, so don't expect reward for doing things that are disliked. Dhuhr time doesn't have a disliked time. Even if you prayed very near the end, as long as it wasn't in the haram time, then you prayed in the choice time and you got big reward. Asr time has a disliked period. So do everything you can to pray Asr before the disliked period. Okay, that disliked period, as I said, it's basically the last 30 minutes before sunset. It's when the sky turns yellow. That period of time is a time when it's disliked to pray Asr. And again, the author does not mention the 5th time in Asr time, which is the haram time. The haram time is at the very, very end of Asr. The haram time is that portion of Asr time where if you started the salat in the haram time, you are not able to complete the salat within Asr time. Even if you prayed the salat as quickly as you possibly can and eliminated every optional part of the salat, you still could not complete it within Asr time. If that's your situation, then it's haram for you to have delayed the salat that long, and you need to repent from delaying it that long. However, as long as you completed at least 1 rak'ah within Asr time, then we still say that your salat was prayed on time. We don't say you missed the salat and you had to make it up. As long as you completed 1 rak'ah within the time, then we say that you prayed it on time. But it was haram that you delayed it so late. Okay? You don't incur the enormous sin of skipping the salat unless like the time went out and you hadn't even begun yet, or the time went out and you hadn't even had enough time to complete 1 rak'ah within the time. MashaAllah. Let's push and do Maghrib next, because Maghrib, there's not a whole lot to say. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, said, the first time for Al-Maghrib is with the sunset. What does he mean by that? He means Maghrib time begins when the sun has completely set. So here, let me draw a little box here so you know what I mean. Let's draw a box. Let's make it like an earthy color, like green. Now, when the sun sets, the sun goes down. Okay? The sun sets like this. And eventually the sun starts to go down below the horizon, below the ground or the ocean or whatever part of the earth that you're looking at. You start seeing the sun go below it like that. Okay? The sun has not set until the entire disk of the sun has disappeared. What you see on your screens right here, this stuff right here, what you see here is a situation where it's still Asr time. The sun has not set yet, so Asr time has not ended yet. Okay, Asr time doesn't end until the sun has completely set. And right here, it's only half set, not completely set. Okay, but if the sun keeps going down, eventually you're going to reach a point where the sun is gone. Right here, the sun is not yet completely gone. This here, what you see here in this example, it is still Asr time. And I encourage all of you to pay attention to this, because this situation is one of the things that made me very certain of how unreliable the phone apps are. Because when I lived in Beirut, Beirut is a city that's right on the ocean. It's very easy to see sunset over the Mediterranean Sea from Beirut. You can see there's nothing blocking your view. There are no buildings in the way. There are no mountains in the way. There's nothing. It's just ocean. It's flat. And I would watch the sun set, and like clockwork every day. When the sun looked like this, I'd start hearing the adhans. The masjids and stuff, most of them abandoned looking with their eyes to see if the time was in, and they started going by the apps. As soon as the app said it was time, the masjid would call the adhan. And anybody who bothered to look could easily see that the sun hadn't set yet. Could easily see that it wasn't Maghrib time yet. And what made it worse is they continued to do this even in Ramadan, knowing that lots of people who had fasted the whole day, they're just waiting to hear the adhan so that they can drink something. And the adhans would start being called when the sun looked like this. And only Allah knows how many people invalidated their fast by drinking when it wasn't yet time to drink. The apps are not at all reliable. Okay, and we don't even know if the people who made these apps are trustworthy people. We don't even know if they're Muslims even. So I strongly encourage you, don't rely on the apps. Look out your window to see if the sun has set. Now, if you're in a city like I am, I don't have a clear view of sunset. There's too many buildings blocking my view. So it's hard for me to know exactly when the sun has set and when Maghrib has come in. So what do? I wait until I am certain. I wait until I can tell from the sky that the sun has definitely set. And by the time I can tell, despite everything blocking my view, by the time I can tell, it's usually quite a bit into Maghrib time. By then, it might be 5 or 6 minutes into Maghrib time by then. But you know what? I don't mind. I don't mind waiting 5 or 6 minutes before I break fast, because at least then I know for sure that I haven't broken the fast. I don't mind waiting 5 or 6 minutes before I pray, because at least then I know for sure I didn't pray early. And don't let people try to convince you, these devils that we have around us, they try to tell you, the Prophet ﷺ said, you got to break fast immediately and without delay. Some of them even know the hadith that, the ummah will continue to be in a good state as long as people break the fast, as long as people rush to break the fast. They will tell you these hadith. And these hadith are true. They're valid. They're sahih. They're correct hadith. And we all recognize that it is, in fact, sunnah to rush to break your fast. But when do you rush to break your fast? Okay, the sunnah is you rush to break your fast after you know that Maghrib time is in. You shouldn't be rushing so much that you break your fast before you even know that Maghrib is in. Okay, that's the shaitan tricking people. Don't fall for the okie doke. Okay, on the day of judgment, it's not going to be about what your phone said. It's going to be about what you did and what you knew. So don't break fast until you know the time is in. Okay? MashaAllah. Someone asks, is being in class online a valid reason to delay salah or even being in a circle of knowledge? Obviously, that's not a valid reason to delay the salat past its time. But yes, that is a valid reason to delay your salat within the salat time. As long as the time doesn't go out, then yes, that's a valid reason. Okay, it's a valid reason. Let's keep reading here. It says the first time for Al-Maghrib is with the sunset, meaning the moment that the sun has completely set, that is the beginning of Maghrib time. And the time continues until the red twilight disappears. So the end of Maghrib is when the red color disappears from the western horizon. So when the sun sets, you get a lot of colors in the sky. Reds and oranges and stuff like that. The red color gets fainter and fainter and fainter and fainter as the sky gets darker and darker and darker and darker. Once the redness is completely gone, once you're at a point where you can't see any red in the sky, it's at that point that Maghrib time has ended. This is another point that a lot of people mistake. And it comes from people attending lessons like this one, but not studying what they learned. So then later on, they want to tell people what they heard, but because they didn't study it well and they didn't memorize it, they mess up when they tell people what they learned. And then the messed up version circulates. What do I mean? I mean, here in Baltimore and maybe in other places as well, there are an awful lot of people who think that Maghrib doesn't begin until the red disappears from the sky. There are people who think, oh, there's red in the sky. That means it's not Maghrib yet. No. Okay. The redness disappearing from the sky, that's not the sign that Maghrib began. That's the sign that Maghrib ended. Okay. When Maghrib begins, when the sun has set. And redness in the sky has no relation to the beginning of Maghrib time. Sometimes you see redness in the sky before the sun has set, while it's still Asr time. Sometimes the redness is there already. And sometimes, I don't know how to put it. It's just like, redness doesn't mean anything when it comes to the end of Asr or the beginning of Maghrib. The redness might begin in Asr time or it might begin in Maghrib time. Okay, you can't use the presence of redness as some kind of proof that Maghrib has begun, nor can you use it as some kind of proof that Asr is still in. Rather, the redness pertains to the end of Maghrib time. Okay, when the redness is gone, Maghrib time is gone. Okay, that's the beginning of Isha. And I'll stop here. We'll talk about Isha time next week, insha'Allah ta'ala. We'll stop with Maghrib. Um, Please do review this stuff. I feel that Asr time and Maghrib time are not difficult. Okay, Asr starts when Dhuhr ends. Asr ends when the sun sets. Maghrib starts when Asr ended at sunset, and Maghrib ends when the red is gone from the sky. These things are very easy to understand and very easy to see. Um, the part that needs study is the Dhuhr part. How do you know when Dhuhr begins? And how do you know when Dhuhr ends? Okay, that's the part that needs study and it needs practice. I really encourage you every day to look out the window and see, look for these signs. Find a stick that you can see from outside your window. If you live in the city, we have all kind of poles along our streets. We got light poles, we got sign poles. Okay, we got fire hydrants. We have all kind of things sticking up straight out of the ground, which you can use to tell if Maghrib is in. I'm sorry, to tell if Dhuhr is in. All you need to do is know which direction is north. And then once you see the shadow is on one side of that north line, right? And you see that it's gone, that it touched the north line and then actually passed to the other side of the north line, well, then you know Dhuhr has come in. Okay, you just need to know, you need to have an idea of what line the shadow needs to cross. And then once you know that, you look out the window and it takes seconds to know whether it's in yet or not in yet. I mean, it takes even less than a second. You know, you look out the window, up, not in. Oh, yeah, it's in. Okay, these things are very easy. Once you practice it, you see how easy it is. These things sound complicated when you're sitting in a class, but once you start doing it, you realize it's not complicated at all. Not even remotely. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. I'm going to look and see if there are comments I didn't answer. If any of you have questions or comments, please drop them in the box now. Insha'Allah ta'ala. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh for those who salamed me. Someone asked about the shadow being twice the height of the object. I trust that I answered that, mashallah, during the lesson. There's some disagreement among the madhabs about that. Someone gave an example. She said, if the adhan is called exactly at 12 noon and the iqama is called at 12:15, does that mean, like, if you pray at 12:15, is that the virtuous time or the choice time? The answer is that's the virtuous time. Okay, because in order to gain the merit of the virtuous time, what's required is from the time the salat came in, you busied yourself with the things that pertain to salat. And one of the things that pertains to salat is waiting for the congregational prayer. Okay, so even if you yourself were ready to pray at 12:05 and you just hung around for 10 minutes waiting for the rest of the jama'ah to gather, then you spent those 10 minutes doing something that was in the interest of the salat. So yes, you do gain the merit of the virtuous time. Also, just, for extra clarity here, I corrected myself when I said that the Hanafis say such and such about Asr time, notice that I corrected myself. I said that's what Abu Hanifa said. Okay, I don't want to attribute this saying to the Hanafi madhab in its entirety. Okay, people who study the Hanafi school know, uh, like when you study the Hanafi school, you're actually studying three madhabs at once. You're studying Abu Hanifa's madhab, and you're studying the madhab of Abu Yusuf and the madhab of Muhammad al-Shaybani. You're studying all three madhabs together. Okay, and both Abu Yusuf and Muhammad al-Shaybani agree with the majority of the madhabs. They say what we say about how Asr begins. It's just Abu Hanifa himself is the one who said the other saying. Okay, so I just want you to understand why I corrected myself. All right, this saying about Asr beginning when the shadows double the height of the object plus the length at zenith, that's Abu Hanifa's personal opinion. Okay, and even his own two companions disagreed with him on that. Good question. Someone asked, how do you determine these times if it's cloudy out? Okay, well, there are ways to determine the prayer times when it's cloudy out. But usually in that case, you're not going to know from the signs that we're mentioning today. You need to go by some other indicator. Okay, and the scholars mention that there are certain things that if they are tested and proven, you can use those as well. The example that, I thought was kind of funny the first time I learned it is the example of a rooster. If you've noticed, if you go out every morning looking to see when the moment when Fajr comes in, and if you notice that there's a certain rooster where that rooster does not start making noise until after Fajr comes in. That particular rooster never makes noise before Fajr, only after Fajr. You've tested him. You've seen him day in and day out. He never starts making noise early. Well, then once that rooster has been tested, you can rely on the rooster. Okay, so that when you hear the rooster making noise, you can say, Fajr is in. Okay, and just like how you can depend on the rooster, you can depend on other things. For example, there are some sheikhs, they have a wird that they say. A certain thing, like Maghrib will come in, they'll pray Maghrib. After they pray Maghrib, they have a certain amount of dhikr that they do. They're going to say this, 500 times, and then say that 500 times, and then they're going to pray 6 rak'ahs, and then they're going to do this, and they know from experience that by the time they're finished their entire wird, Isha time is in. They know that from experience. And so once they've confirmed, because it's been tested, that the time that it takes him to do the wird is going to fill up the entire remainder of Maghrib time, well, then he doesn't have to look to see if Isha comes in. He knows after praying Maghrib that once he completes his wird, Isha is in. Tricks like this work when it's cloudy. Okay, so for example, we all know that the sun sets. This is something that's tested and known. Sunset, the time of sunset doesn't shift by more than 2 minutes from one day to the next day. We know that. Okay, so therefore, if you observed with your eyes yesterday that the sun set at, say, 8 o'clock, but today it's cloudy and you can't tell when the sun sets, well, then you ask yourself, is this the time of year when the sunset is getting later and later every day? If the answer is yes, well, then you know that the sun will have set by 8:02. Okay, because the sunset doesn't move by more than 2 minutes from one day to the next day. So once it becomes 8:02, you can go ahead and say the sun has set, because you know from experience, from observation and experience, that 24 hours and 2 minutes after the last sunset, there would be the next sunset. So you can rely on things that are tried and true in that respect. You can also rely on trustworthy people who are informing you if they know what they're talking about. So in the past, before we had these phones and things, the muezzins in the masjids, they used to look with their eyes and confirm that the salat time was in because they knew the rules. They would confirm that the time was in, and then they would call the adhan. So in the past, if you were just like a regular Muslim, you could just hear the adhan, and that would be enough for you to know that the time was in. You wouldn't have to confirm it yourself. You could trust the adhan because the one calling the adhan is trustworthy, and he himself called the adhan after confirming with his eyes. So everyone else could just go by the adhan. But we can't do that in our times because most of the masjids nowadays, they call the adhan without confirming through observation first. And in fact, in many masjids, the one calling the adhan isn't even trustworthy. Okay, that person is not, frequently, I don't know, just sometimes, more times than we would like, the one calling the adhan is an enormous sinner and therefore not trustworthy. So even if he did confirm by looking, which they don't do, you wouldn't be able to go by his saying. Someone asked, if you missed Asr because you were working, but you were able to pray Maghrib on time during Maghrib time, and then you made up the Asr that you missed, do you get credit? The answer is the Asr that you prayed during Maghrib time will fulfill your obligation of praying Asr, but it counts as a make-up prayer. What does that mean? It means you missed the Asr Salat, which is an enormous sin. And then when you prayed Asr during Maghrib time, what you were doing was making up the Salat you missed. You prayed it late. Okay, so praying it late, it's good in the sense that you at least performed the Salat. You got the obligation to pray it off of your neck. But it's bad in the sense that you didn't pray it within its time, which was an enormous sin, something you need to repent from, and something you need to try your best not to do. Okay, everyone who works, okay, every job that any one of us work at, they have to allow you periodic breaks, even if it's just to use the bathroom. Okay, we're humans. We have biological needs. Okay, if they give you a break to go to the bathroom, then perform your salat on that break. Do whatever is necessary for you to be able to pray on time. Some of these jobs, they try to get real mean. They don't want to give Muslims a prayer break. They'll give cigarette addicts a smoke break, but they won't give the Muslim a prayer break, even though it takes about the same amount of time to smoke a cigarette as it does to perform a salat. They just want to be mean. So, if you have that type of environment, don't tell them you're going to make salat. Just tell them you need to go to the bathroom and pray. And if you need to minimize your bathroom breaks, then what I advise you to do is to pray Dhuhr near the end of its time, because remember, Dhuhr time doesn't have a dislike time or even a permissible time. The choice time of Dhuhr, which is a good time to pray, the choice time extends almost to the very end of Dhuhr time. So you can take one bathroom break near the end of Dhuhr time, make your wudu, pray Dhuhr, and then inshallah, you should be able to hold that wudu long enough that when Asr time comes in, you'll be able to pray Asr near the beginning of Asr time. Using one wudu to pray 2 salats. That way you don't have to run to the bathroom for wudu multiple times. Inshallah, this is something that some people resort to if they have a work environment where they can't get free to make wudu many times throughout the day. You just make wudu once near the end of Dhuhr, and that wudu should suffice for Dhuhr and Asr. And who knows, if you're still there at Maghrib time, it might even suffice for Maghrib, especially in the winter when the times are close together. MashaAllah, may Allah make it easy for everyone. Okay, these 5 salats, I disagree that they're hard to do, but I do understand that depending on people's situations, it may be less easy for some people than others. Some people may need to, really go against the grain of whatever the culture is where they work or where they live. But these things are good. It teaches you to be strong. If you stand up and insist on praying your salat, despite what they say, it makes you stronger as a person. MashaAllah. It's like a test. And once you pass through it, you come out stronger. It's like these video games where you're getting XP, 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 and then suddenly you reach a new level. You level up. It's like that. That's big XP when you're going against whatever, all the pressures that are against you, and you just do what you know is right. Despite the pressure, it has a big impact on your heart, inshallah, and a big impact on your character. So I encourage you to do it. And you never know what the after effects will be. Some of these kafirs, they laugh at Islam, they laugh at Muslims and things like that. But when they see you sticking to your religion and being serious about it, they respect you. They might even be impressed by it. They might even come and want to talk to you about Islam and become Muslim themselves. Okay? There are a number of, we don't know the future. We don't know what's going to come out of it. So just insist on what's right, and inshallah, whatever Allah wills will happen. Any other questions before we sign off? Okay, good, because I got to go. Let's say La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. Barakallahu feekum. I'll see you next week, insha'Allah ta'ala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.